Clone Wars, maybe. And that was it.
Maybe we can edit it out. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna edit the starting point. Okay. Alright, I'm gonna count to I'm gonna do a countdown. I'm like in action.
Yeah, I'm Sean, by the way.
I'm Sean. Yeah, do you have an alias ready?
Sean, or what do you want to guys have a good alias in mind for yourselves, or maybe?
Well, the problem is the podcasts already have my name, so nothing I can do.
Where should I go?
I'll just go with Nick. Besides, I'm
just
not really active on social media anyway.
Okay, I'm Sean, by the way, for this.
All right, Sean.
All right.
Sean the sheep.
It's easy for you guys to go with Sean. Otherwise, you'll forget it, and at some point in the video, you'll just say, "Hey, the Sean."
Right?
Okay, anyway, shut that up.
3,
2, 1.
1. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are the Wisdom Factory Literary Society. I'm with Nick, and I'm Jordan, and
Sean.
we have a great discussion for you guys today. Sean came up with this idea, and I think everyone's going to be interested to hear what we have to talk about, because today for you guys we have Star Wars, one and only, the greatest movie series in the 21st American culture. I think I would put this up with Shakespeare, honestly. Some of the writing that is done in there, all the deep meaning that you can derive out of it, all the things that we're going to talk about today, which is first, we're going to be talking about the Jedi versus the Sith, coming out strong. Second, we'll be talking about character arcs, right? So how do these characters develop over the time frame of the movies? And then third, we're going to be talking about technology, because there's a lot of interesting technologies in Star Wars. And I mean, all of us wish that we could have lightsabers, or all of us wish that we could have the holographic technology. And lastly, we'll be talking about the politics, the geopolitics, because I think Star Wars, at the end of the day, is a movie about fight for power and about restoring the balance of power. So with those four things, let's go ahead and get started. And but before we do that, Sean, why did you want to talk about Star Wars specifically? This is your topic. This is your Wisdom Factory debut. Mm-hmm. What did you think needed to be talked about?
Well, I always felt Star Wars was I started off Star Wars as a kid watching it on TV, and I was like, wow, this is awesome, right? And you had lightsabers, you had all these laser fires and all these fireworks show that all children love. And I was like, wow, this is so exciting, right? So it really caught me with all the action and everything and over the years, it just kind of built into it. And I was like, I got more and more deeply involved. And, there were certain characters that really some of the greatest writers in history have said, the greatest thing to write about is the conflict of the human heart. Mm-hmm. And I found some of those characters in the Star Wars universe with characters such as Darth Vader, who was always fighting with himself. And I really found that character to be really well written. And I really wanted to talk a little bit about some of these characters and the world, the universe itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's necessary because, I mean, I had a similar experience. I remember in the maybe late 90s, my uncle came and he brought me a tape. And the tape had he bought me the three series, right? Because the 1, 2, and 3 hadn't come out. So I think this was 4, 5, and 6. And he bought me the tape. And just looking at the art alone, I mean, you know how you have the box art of these videos. And I was like, oh my God, I couldn't wait to put it in the VHS. I put it in the VHS. And ever since then, I can't tell you how many times I've seen all the Star Wars movies. I've seen them countless times. And every time I watch them, it's just like that first time. And nothing else really gets me like that. There's very few books or, movies or songs that I can just listen to or watch or experience over and over, and it still has that strong impact. But the important thing is that because all of us have had this experience, and because I think a lot of America and a lot of people outside of America have had that strong connection to Star Wars, it's important to delve into it a little bit more deeper, outside of I was entertained from it, or I like it, or I'm a fan of it. Because I think the reason why all of us have had this really strong connection with Star Wars is because there's a deep meaning into it, or because there's a lesson to it, or because we identify with certain aspects of the story or of the universe. Mm-hmm. And so today, our mission is to explore those as best as we can. So we're going to try to philosophize about Star Wars. Nick, did you have a similar, experience with Star Wars growing up?
For me, I quite enjoyed it as for the action and some of the drama that was going on in the original trilogy. And it wasn't until later on, as I watched it more and more, and as I got interested in politics, I started noticing those key pieces of it, and my interest in it just grew from there. And obviously, the lore just made it just as good.
Yeah, every time you watch Star Wars, you learn something different, and that's just it's such an amazing accomplishment by George Lucas and everybody who worked on Star Wars. So with that being said, the central part of Star Wars that I would say for anybody who watches, at least the most obvious thing, because even a 4-year-old child recognizes the fight between the good forces and the evil forces, or the light forces and the dark forces, and that is the Jedi versus Sith. So Nishant, real quickly, what does it mean to be a Sith? What sort of training do you have to go through to become a Sith? What does a Sith believe in? What does that sort of value structure look like? What are some important characteristics that distinguish being a Sith from being anything else?
The best way to look at the Sith would be to see them as the antithesis of the Jedi. They are the complete opposite of all the things that the Jedi believe in. The Jedi are designed, or like they follow the philosophy of not embracing their emotions, but keeping their emotions in control, not letting those emotions take over. That is how they maintain their order, that is how they conduct themselves, and that is how they live their lives as a monastic order. And the Sith are the opposite. They embrace their emotions, they embrace the rage, the anger, and they use that anger to channel the Force through them and create energy. And then that's how they are kind of like the very opposite of these very core ideas of what the Jedi and the Sith really are. And this has led to a great sense of battle between the two sides over the many millennia in the Star Wars universe. And you can probably see it as like the Sith have this fundamental problem that they're always involved in the civil war for power with each other, because they have just so lost themselves in this maniacal pursuit of just power. And it has led them to just over the years just never really get the one hand up over the Jedi. Is what led them to lose the big war when there were so many Sith and so many Jedi in the Old Republic. They lost this huge battle against the Jedi because they couldn't really work together as one group. And eventually Darth Bane came up with the rule of two, where it had to be one master who embraced the dark side and an apprentice who desired that power to defeat the master and take over.
Well, let me ask you this, because in the Jedi Order, I'm going to cover the Jedi Order, so that's why I'm getting you to elaborate on Sith structure a little bit. But if you were training to become a Sith, what does that look like? So, like for example, a Jedi, you have to get in touch with your instincts. You have to let your feelings go. When you're a Sith, is there any trials? Because like to me, a Jedi, obviously there's a training structure. There's things that you got to do. Is that true for the Sith, or is it simply just getting in touch with your emotions and letting rage take over and destroying things and getting power?
Well, the most key fundamental rule or the understanding we have in the Star Wars universe is the Force sensitivity. The greater the midichlorians in your body is how they judge, the greater ability to channel the Force you have. And that determines how strong of a Jedi or a Sith you're going to become.
Right.
And that is a great point of it's what got Anakin Skywalker kind of like everyone interested, because he had this high concentration of midichlorians in him, gave him so much power with the Force, because he was able to access it so easily. And that is the very key important aspect of the whole thing. Yeah. Now, back to your question, the main point, right? It really depends on what age we are going through. Are we going through the War of the Old Republic when there are a lot of Sith around? Because then they probably had a much more different structure of finding Sith apprentices, and I think Nicholas can cover that a little bit more. But the best way I can describe is you first have to be seen by probably a Sith master, right? Who first sees you and sees that you have this sensitivity to the Force, and that you have this potential to hone the dark side in you. Right? So the very first thing is that you have to get lucky, I guess, to be found by the Sith master who will take you as his apprentice, right? So usually what happens with the Jedi is that sometimes Jedi, they fall to the dark side, they fall to the temptation, and they leave the order. Then they go out and they find a Sith master.
Yeah.
and that's how they join the Sith, right? Or they find an ancient Sith temple, and then they uncover some secrets, and then they learn this power.
So Nick, do you have anything else you want to add about specifically? Well, I kind of want to hear a little bit more about how a Sith becomes. How do you go from beginning to knowing that, okay, this is what I want to do. This is the career or that I want to follow, right? A Sith career, to actually becoming a Sith master. Because with anything, there has to be a training period. There has to be skills that you have to acquire. Because I have an example that I want to give you guys, but I want to hear you guys' interpretation first.
Well, from my understanding, if we're not going on the Knights of the Old Republic, if we're going into the movies, into the movie trilogies and the lore of that era, of that time period, then what usually happens with the Sith and how they even become the Sith is that because of the rule of two, it's very difficult to even find apprentices.
Yeah.
But there's a way around this. In the Jedi Order, whenever you hear people going to the Sith, it's always members or typically apprentices within the Jedi Order. They're still learning at a young age, but there are times where they don't like what feels like control in the Jedi Order. For instance, like you can't have emotional attachments to other people, because if you have those emotional attachments, that could be a catalyst for you to commit to something in order to protect someone that you love. And if that emotion overtakes you, then you'll start going to the Sith because that emotion's going to be controlling you all the way. Or for those Sith that decide to do it through other means, for instance, in the case of Palpatine and Darth Vader, what Palpatine did was that he went in the shadows and said, look, I need your help. The Jedi Order is not what it used to be. I know the way. You can obtain that freedom. You can be with the people that you love, and you can do what's right, what you see as right. And that's how he was able to tempt him to go to that side. He liked the reason why Anakin went to become Darth Vader was because of that temptation to be able to do what you want, be able to get what you want, and that it does what you believe is right.
It's the classic Faustian deal with the devil. I kind of see that's what it was. You think you're gonna get what you want, and that's why you sign on. But at the end of the day, the deal changes. But real quick, and this is for both of you guys, whoever wants to answer. What's the ideal qualities of a Sith master? So no more, not talking about training a little bit anymore, because I think you guys covered that really well. But like talking about, okay, so now you're the master. What sort of qualities and skills do you inhibit? Like powerful, you're strong, you have powers the Jedi don't have, you're able to dominate, the universe. Like, what does the ideal Sith Lord look like in terms of qualities?
That is a good question. I think Nicholas can answer this a little bit better. Who was the emperor that became immortal? And this is based off the game that came out with the two brothers who were twins. Emperor something, Valorian. Or was it?
Wait, no, you don't mean Mandalore.
No, Valorian.
Valorian. I don't know why. I'm thinking it's either Darth Bane or no. I think it was Revan. No.
No, not really.
No, it wasn't. I don't know the answer to this question.
We'll probably get back to that, but just like a little bit more obvious example. So who do you guys think is stronger, Darth Vader or Palpatine?
Are we talking Darth Vader before? Like, are we talking Anakin Skywalker?
Darth Vader at the height of his power, like I would say in the Empire. The Empire Strikes Back or Return of the Jedi. Who do you think is more strong?
That's a little problematic to put it that way, because here's the thing. From what you could find in the lore and in the books, or even a little bit in the movies, but predominantly in the lore, Darth Vader would remain below Palpatine, and the reason why is that, one, Anakin, I'm going to be using those names simultaneously, but Darth Vader, he went purely on rage, emotion, and personal loss. And because of that emotion, it overtook him. While Palpatine, on the other hand, he was straight up maniacal, and he was plotting, methodical. He would always plan his ways through. And the only time he'd let rage overtake him is when he's in a corner. That's the only few times he would do that. That's why Palpatine, because of his straight up intelligence, he was always going to win over Anakin, over Darth Vader, because Darth Vader was nothing but brawn. And then on top of that, when Anakin became Darth Vader, we all know how he became Darth Vader. He got his limbs chopped off, and he was nearly burned alive on near the lava rivers of Mustafar, on Mustafar. And because of that, his body was extremely ruined. And even Palpatine mentioned it, that if it wasn't for that instance, then Darth Vader could have been stronger than Palpatine given enough time. Actually, they said that he was a freaking genius. He was a prodigy.
So that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because I tend to think it's Palpatine. I think Anakin had more potential. I mean, Anakin had more potential. You see his rise, and just watching him fight, and even though he loses to Obi-Wan, I always love watching Anakin fight in that scene on Mustafar, right? Mustafar, because he's just so strong and he's so aggressive, you know. Although Obi-Wan's able to parry him, he just looks so athletic and so agile, and I love it. It's just it's true power manifested. It's just, you know, the environment sort of played against him, the circumstances played against him, and he should have been smarter in dealing with those. But when you're blinded, which is why the Jedi choose to ignore emotions, because you can get blinded by your emotions, and instead of making you stronger, they make you weaker. But we'll get into the Jedi. I'll get into the Jedi, but real quick, I want to sort of put the finishing touches on the Sith part of it. So I think Palpatine is the embodiment of the Sith Lord, at least from the movies.
Right. He's at least in the movies.
So and you touched up on why a little bit, and I would give the deciding factor to the fact that he was able to, I mean, he had the plan. His plan started from the first movie, and it's almost complete in the sixth movie. I mean, that is amazing. Like that type of foresight, that type to plan ahead. I mean, he had Order 66 in the wings. I mean, he had turning Anakin in the wings. The
clones.
He was sowing the seeds of dissension between him and the clones. I mean, that ability to plan is integral in what I think is truly indicative of a strong Sith Lord, which is grabbing power and exercising that power. I mean, he created the Galactic Empire, and he did so by manipulating the Senate and the democratic aspects, and cutting deals with the separatists and doing all of these things. He was very politically savvy. And so it's not only about being a good soldier, which is what I think Darth Vader ultimately is. I mean, he has some command power in him, but he's more of a fighter, whereas Palpatine he's a fighter as well, but he's a ruler. You know? And I think that's what makes him a really good Sith Lord. Is there anything else that you guys, like finishing touches, that you guys wanted to talk about when it comes to the Sith?
No,
that we haven't covered?
I think we covered everything about the Sith.
Yeah.
Yeah. So who's y'all's favorite Sith Lords so far?
Pretty much Palpatine. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty cliche, but he is one of the best out there.
Yeah.
There are very few that are above him.
Yeah, he kicks ass.
I do believe it was Emperor Valerian, and
It probably was.
And the reason why I think here's the thing. There's Darth Plagueis, who was like Snoke, and the thing about Snoke is that he's an immortal, and that's the ultimate pursuit that a lot of the Sith Lords throughout history had this pursuit over, and Valerian was another one. I do believe he's Revan as well, like reincarnated. I could be wrong on this, guys, so don't quote me on this, but to my understanding, he is also immortal, that he can astral project his soul or something and live even if his body is destroyed. That's one of the powers of the Sith, the dark side. Just becoming immortal, and just even if you lose your body, you can survive.
There's an interesting, and I don't know how true this is, but this is the sense that you get from watching the movie, that a Sith can become more powerful. Like there's always that, for some reason they always lose to the Jedi, but it seems like there are powers that are available to a Sith that aren't available to a Jedi. And so if they really wanted to, they could become, well, not if they really wanted to, because obviously they want to, but it's at least open to them. The possibilities there to tap into their side of the Force offers something that the Jedi side of the Force doesn't. Now, if you want to talk about immortality, I would say the equivalent would be the Jedi ghost power, you know? So you're sort of immortal in that sense, but you're immortal in the sense that you're helping the future generations, because I don't think they can act in the world. But anyway, so I think, well, the other thing that I wanted to bring up And it's because, like, personally, I identify with the Jedi. So I'm throwing that out there. I think you guys, it's fair to say, identify more with the Sith.
We identify more with the gray Jedi
Yeah.
philosophy.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
More with the gray.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. So when I just forgot to mention this, but when you talk about training, from what I saw, a good example of this is how Palpatine starts to coach Anakin into being a good, Sith Lord, a Sith, master. And the first thing that Anakin has to do is it's not only believe in acquiring more power. You have to destroy your sense of morality. You have to destroy your sense of what's right and wrong, at least from an absolute perspective, and turn it into a relative perspective. And in order to do that, it's kind of like with Aristotle's virtue theory. You have to act it out. You have to behave in a certain way. And I think it's pretty much telling. And I love how George Lucas did this, because the first thing he got Anakin to do was do the most heinous thing that you could possibly do. And if you guys remember, Anakin's job in Order 66, as powerful as he is, wasn't to destroy a great Jedi Master. It was to kill younglings. It was to kill the weakest of the Jedi, to kill the most vulnerable of the Jedi, to kill the most innocent of the Jedi. And I think he did that for a reason. Obviously, that's overkill. He could have sent anybody to do that. He could have sent droids to do that. But he chose to send Anakin to do that. And I think the reason why is because, once you kill kids, you cross the line. You cross the Rubicon. There's no coming back from that. At least, it's very hard to come back from that after you've done that. So that's the type of thing that I think a Sith Lord needs to do. That's part of their training. They have to be able to be willing to do whatever is necessary to further their goal, to further their hold on power. Because obviously, from a Sith perspective, these Jedis are going to grow up. They're going to grow up and be, potential fighters, maybe. So I don't know if that's their justification, but there certainly was Palpatine, had a goal there. So with that being said, I want to go ahead and move into the Jedi. You move into the Jedi, and so Nishant, you sort of touched on a little bit about what it means to be a Jedi, and you said it's ignoring your emotions, and I think that is a crucial aspect of it. And there's definitely parts where I personally don't agree with it, because emotions are necessary. They're there. They help you flourish. It's what it means to be. Emotions help you bring peace and justice into the world, but they can cloud your judgment, and they can hinder you. They can blind you, and I think that's why the Jedi do it. Like I think the Jedi are smart enough to realize, when emotions can be healthy and when they can't be healthy. Because obviously they love each other, they have compassion for each other. But the two things that I want to mention, because I'm sort of defending the Jedi because I believe in them. But obviously I'm open to you guys' interpretations about their weaknesses. But the Jedi believe in controlling their emotions to a sense to where they're ignoring them, but in order they do so that they can get in touch with a more primal feeling, to get more in touch with the what's it called, the cellular structure, the midichlorians,
The midichlorians.
yeah, to get more in touch with the midichlorians, to get more in touch with that force that moves things forward. So yeah, you're letting go of your emotions, but you're letting your instincts take over. And that's what I think is one way that they sort of justify that, is because you're letting go of one, which is more confusing and more impulsive, and getting in touch with another one that's more always in line with what needs to happen. And the second thing is that they never neglect rationality. They never neglect their ability to judge the world and to move forward in that world in the way that needs to happen. They obviously are able to make judgments about, one of the defining characteristics about the Jedi is that they believe in democracy. They believe in, people should have autonomy for themselves, whereas the Empire and the Sith believe in arbitrary power. They're at the top of the power structure, and whatever they say goes. Whereas the Jedi are fighting, and sometimes they don't, you can make arguments that no, they're pretty much the same. They're fighting for power as well. But I think that their ultimate allegiance is, like Obi-Wan said, to democracy. So, but look, just the last thing I want to say about the Jedi is that their training. I always liked watching Luke. I think Luke, you get the best idea of what it means to be a Jedi from Luke and his training with Obi-Wan, with his training with
Yoda.
Yoda, And so what I see from that is, first you have to have faith in the Force. You have to realize that the Force is there, and there can't be any sort of question in you that there is this greater power, this greater right and wrong, or this greater force that governs the universe, and you can tap into it. Because it's like Han Solo is like, what does he say about the Force? It's like, he's not convinced, because I remember when they're on the ship, they're on the Millennium Falcon for the first time, and Luke has his training hat on, and he's trying to, deflect the shots of that little ball that's flying in the air. And Han Solo is just laughing at him. He's like, what are you guys doing? You guys believe in this witchcraft or whatever it is? He dismisses it.
Right, or some type of magic or something?
Yeah, some type of magic or something. But no, it's you have to believe in it. And so when you believe in it, you're able to tap into it. And I think that's when you see Luke lift up the X-Wing, or you see Yoda lift up the X-Wing, and then from that point on, Luke is pretty much convinced that, okay, this is real. To me, that's the moment where, you have the music, da-na, 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 with the X-Wing coming up from the water, and then you see Luke convinced, and then you see him start to train. But one of the interesting aspects of Jedi training that I particularly like is you have to confront your fear. So it's not ignoring fear, I would say, in this particular aspect, because you have to confront it. So you have to be scared of it. And that's where I want to throw this to you guys, because I think that's an important scene. And I never, as many times have I seen Star Wars, and I told you, like, I learn every time I watch. This is one of those parts where it's still a mystery to me. So hopefully you guys can help me solve this mystery right here. Is, what does Yoda mean, or what do they mean when they send Luke into the woods and they're like, you take, what does he say? You take what what's in there. Luke is like, what's in there? Whatever you take with you. What does he mean by that? Any of you guys have a good idea on that?
I'm trying to remember that scene, because I know it's there, and from what you're telling me, that's something along the lines of, you take what you get, or take what you have learned from this experience. That sort of thing.
Well, it's the scene where he goes into the woods, and then he ends up seeing Darth Vader. And then he gets into a fight with Darth Vader. It's his dream. And then he ends up destroying Darth Vader, chopping off his head, and then Darth Vader's head falls into the floor, and then the top of his mask pops off, and it's Luke's face.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
That's just more as either a warning, interpretation, a lesson. I would say it's a mixture between a lesson and a little bit of his possible future of what he could become. So
wow.
What Yoda was teaching him was just basically, just learn what you can, and just be mindful of the potential consequences of your actions. Something along those lines. I would have to see the scene again just to be on the safe side, but I'm pretty sure it's along those lines.
I think it's in the second movie. It's in the second movie.
Episode 5.
Well, episode 5, yeah.
Well, there was a lot of the topics that were covered that I'll go over one at a time. So first thing I want to talk about is that the Jedi aren't necessarily a political faction. They are more or less like a autonomous monastic order of just like these warrior monks. You can think of them as like that. And, they just get along really well with the Republic. They made some good... what's it that they came to an agreement with the Republic, with the old Republic, and then it's been like that for like thousands of years. But generally, the thing is, the Republic over the years has become a little bit corrupt with the core worlds versus the rim worlds. They've just done too much bureaucracy, and it's corrupting the whole system, right? And Count Dooku saw this, and he was really upset. He was like, "Why aren't we interfering? We are the Jedi Order. We are peacekeepers. We are seeing all this wrong happen across the whole empire. I mean, the universe, the Star Wars universe empire wasn't made then." And the Jedi were like, nope, we're not going to interfere. This is not our place. We're not going to interfere in politics, right? And this led Dooku to fall to the dark side because of his how much upset he got.
Yeah.
Then going back more, and then for the thing about the that you said, so the thing is, after their disaster with Anakin Skywalker, right, and that led to the whole Order 66 and the destruction of the Jedi, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda were like very careful with Luke and Leia. like they had to make sure Luke does not become another Darth Vader, right? So for them, they had to train him the right way, right? They didn't want to just create another Darth Vader for the Empire.
Right? They couldn't follow the old ways.
Yeah, and because in my opinion, the Jedi really messed it up with Anakin Skywalker. Like they could have done. I think there were a lot of places where they could have done things a lot much more clearly. Like there's just some scenes where where Anakin Skywalker is like asking Yoda for advice, right? And Yoda is like, hey, you must learn to let go. He's like, because Anakin Skywalker, he's having these visions of like Padme dying, right? He's like, I don't know, I cannot Yoda just tells him you have to learn to let him go with your emotions, right? And that's like what kind of like that in my mind? What kind of advice is that? That's terrible right now. No one's gonna like that advice. What are you doing?
Right, and even if we were to mention all the other answers that they were given, they were very vague.
Right.
There was no real detail. They couldn't really answer the question. In a sense, they kind of dodged it.
Yeah, and to me, like on that point, because I watched this and I'm like, I always get angry when I see Mace Windu not allow Anakin into the Jedi and to be a Jedi Master. It's like all of the good things that he's done for the Jedi, and they don't really reward him. And it's because they mistrust him, and you know, maybe they know something that we don't know. Maybe they sense something that we don't know. But I feel like he earned it. I feel like Anakin earned it. And you're absolutely right. I agree with you, Nishant. That the Jedi made mistakes that led to Anakin becoming Darth Vader. That's definitely true.
I would say that their reasoning is a little justified in a sense. Because mind you, in their eyes, the way that they did things was, remember one of the main tenets of the Jedi Order. It was basically get rid of your emotions and be stoic the entire time. That's why whenever they did their recruitment, the younglings would always be the youngest of the young. When Anakin came in, he was too old. That was one of the arguments that Mace Windu brought up. He was too old. By that point, that kid had already developed emotional attachments rather, to people like his mother, who later on found out that his mother had died. So he goes on a rage, and this is one of those cases.
Well, yeah, so that's, you know what, so that actually ties us into the next thing that we want to talk about, which is because Star Wars has these very colorful characters. Like, you can fall in love with all of them, you know, Anakin, Luke, Palpatine, Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan. You talked about Admiral Thrawn. We're going to give you guys a breakdown on Admiral Thrawn today. But let's start with Anakin, because I feel... and I hate Anakin because he became Darth Vader. And I love people that have strong potential. And I hate it when they don't use that potential for the right in the right ways. So I have a love-hate relationship with Anakin. And you know, to me that looks like I empathize with him, and I understand why he became bad. And it's not all the Jedi's fault. It's really the fault of the universe. And what I mean by that is because, look, Anakin was born a slave. He was born a slave. He was born so low. And if you think about it, it's kind of, we're going to talk about his character arc. I mean, he ends up being he's not an emperor, but he ends up being pretty much second in line to ruling the galaxy from a slave. So he did some things right. Well, from his life perspective. But growing up as a slave, I think sort of set him on the wrong foot, seeing that he didn't have a dad, right? Like he didn't have a father as well.
Not really, unless you include the slave owner.
Yeah, no.
Which, no, that doesn't count at all.
Let's include that. That was his dad. So a slave owner is your father. So he had that problem, and you know, he was stuck on a land where he was, you know, there's really not much to do. Although he did a good job of being smart and utilizing his talents and being a small engineer and training to be a pilot and all those things. He was naturally gifted. But I think that you go from that. And then, obviously, some good things happen where the Jedi see his potential and they adopt him. But then his mom dies, right? Not only does his mom die, but his mom gets, I mean, it's sort of, I don't know if this happens, but to me, it's always been implied that she was beaten and she was raped. She was tortured and raped, you know? And his mom, like, that's all Anakin has at that point in the movie. I mean, he has Padme. But that's pretty much all he loves and cares about. And the worst possible thing that could happen happens to his mom. And so, I mean, you know, how is anyone supposed to respond to that? You know, anyone he's human. And then, so not only does that happen to him, but he starts having visions of his wife dying, you know, and then the Jedi don't trust him. And so his life is a tragedy. There's a lot of negative things that happen in his life that sort of make him the way that he is. And a lot of it is beyond his control. And I think that's why he has a sense of, I need to be in control so I can stop this shit. I can stop this shit finally. So for me, that's when I look at Anakin's character arc, I see those, and I don't give him a pass, but I can understand how, you know, that sort of made it fertile ground for him to be turned to the dark side.
Okay.
So what about you guys? Was there specifically on Anakin and his character arc? What do you guys think are some interesting points or observations?
Just that I think his story is more of a tragedy. I think but more like a Shakespearean kind of like tragedy where he just like goes on this, like he was destined to bring balance to the Force if you think about it.
Yeah.
And he's the one who actually did in a sense bring balance to the Force if you think about it. He you know, think about it, there were thousands of Jedis to just 2 Sith at the time when Anakin was like you know, with the Jedi Order. And like the Force was completely imbalanced for like thousands of years. There were so many Jedi and there were just 2 Sith, and you know, he pretty much quelled the number of Jedis. And then when he killed Emperor Palpatine, right, as Darth Vader, he actually literally brought balance to the Force. I think that's so his character has some very like, I think Vader as a character is something much more interesting. It's
Let's talk about Vader. Let's talk about you know, his development from where he was on Mustafara to where he was when he died, you know, in Luke's arms. What can you take away from that?
That's the beauty of Vader. Like I initially started off, the good story is the conflict of the human heart, and that's what Vader was. He was conflicted by this emotion, and Luke was trying to convince Vader to come back to the side of the light because he saw that goodness. He saw Anakin Skywalker still there inside Darth Vader. Like he wanted to bring his father back from the dark side and save him in some way, and that was the real victory that Luke had in that entire arc for Luke. It was not, you know, it wasn't a battle of like physical victory. It was more of a battle of like this, not just ideology, but this deeper meaning that they were both having as father and son. Like, you know, Luke was trying to fight, following his father's footsteps of joining the dark side. At the same time, he tried to bring his father back into the light side. And so that was like, and you know, Vader as a character throughout, like Vader is. It's covered like in a lot of the stories around Vader in the comics. Vader spends a lot of his time like just in his cell, like he's living on life support. He's not Anakin Skywalker. He does not have a lot of the powers that Anakin Skywalker had or was destined to have, because he just lost so many body parts. Because he lost so many body parts, he lost a lot of the midichlorians. Right? Because he lost a lot of power from the Force that he was destined to have. It's why he became so weak. Palpatine basically wanted the Anakin Skywalker, the one he thought would become his. Palpatine didn't really Palpatine was scared of losing power, right? But Palpatine at the same time wouldn't mind losing power to a very powerful Sith Lord that he created.
Ooh, that brings up a good point. Do you think, because obviously Anakin has the choking power, which I haven't seen anyone else have. But if you think about it, I've never seen him exercise that kind of power as a Jedi. So is that something that you think he learned when he transitioned to the dark side?
Now that is an interesting thing. The way I would go about thinking about that is more from the perspective of when the movies came out. So when Darth Vader had this chokehold, which was like his symbol,
that's his book.
Right? And then I think that the prequels kind of like just moved that whole idea, that character.
They added it in episode 3. When he
chokes Padme.
How he kills his wife. And I think it would make more sense if that was a power that he learned on the Sith side while he was on the Sith side. Because he was supposed to learn how to save her from the Sith side. And he ended up learning how to kill her from the Sith side.
Sorry, just to add to that, you know what a good story would have been? Like if he found out that his mother had been choked to death, right? And that led to his character to using the force of the choke because he was just like, or something along those lines.
No, I totally agree with you there.
Yeah.
Nick, is there anything that we missed about Darth Vader or Anakin that you wanted to cover in terms of his growth as a person?
I would say for Anakin, I would say partially because of this is where I would agree with the Jedi Order in terms of, debating whether they should even bring Anakin in. Because I think they were in the right of not bringing him in when he was that old. They should have brought him in when he was younger. That way it was easier, more malleable.
But he was a kid when they brought him in. I don't understand.
Well, what they said was there was a specific age range. I think it was before 10 years, somewhere from 10 and below, but he was 10 and up.
Yeah, but Luke started when he was like 18, 17.
Yeah, but this is the Jedi Order. They followed the system for thousands of years.
It was the institution thing.
Yeah, it was not only the institution, but the reason why they even had that type of restriction, including the celibacy one. I'm going to call it celibacy. But basically, for the kids, when you're young, you could teach them anything. They were a blank slate. But the problem with him was that he was at an age where he recognized who his parents were, what life he was in.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So he has those emotional attachments that make him who he is. Yeah. And that was the foundation for what he would become later on. And the death of his mother is a catalyst, or at least one of them. Yeah. And Padme is another one as well, one of the finishing blows that turned him to the dark side.
So I think there's so much to learn from Anakin's life. And I thank George Lucas for creating the Star Wars universe, because I know that it has impacted so many people's lives in so many ways. For me personally, because I believe in becoming a Jedi, it's very important for me to pay attention to Anakin's story, because the last thing that I want to do is become like that. And so what I learned from it is, I have to control those type of emotions that would lead me to have destructive actions, because that's pretty much what happens to Anakin. The line is crossed when he kills those, when he finds out that his mom is captured, and then he kills all of those people. To me, that's the first time that you truly see his countenance fall, his face become like a dark face. And it's because he's been holding back this rage and this anger his whole life, and then he just allows it to overwhelm him and overcome him. And in that moment, he disregards his Jedi reverence and acts like a Sith Lord, or acts like a proto-Sith Lord in that moment. And so for anyone out there who wants to be on more of a Jedi side, I mean, noticing Anakin's pitfalls, noticing how could Anakin have handled this differently, or how could he have handled it better? Should he have listened to Yoda? Because I agree, when I saw that scene, I was like, oh my God, is this is the moment where I disassociate myself with the Jedi Order? Because that's not an advice that I can personally follow. If something happens to my mom, I'm going to show her the respect she deserves and love her as much as I possibly can. I'm not going to ignore that love at all. But Yoda is actually right in the movie, because that love and that attachment to Padme is exactly what destroys Anakin. That's what leads him to make the decision, because the moment that Anakin turns is when he's sitting there at that scene with Emperor Palpatine, and they're watching like this music visual show where there's all these orbs going, and then he tells him that, did you know the Sith have the power to save the ones that they love? And that is the moment right there where something clicks in Anakin's head, and he's like, that right there might be worth me switching to the dark side if I could gain that power, because my biggest problem in my life is saving Padme, and you're telling me that the Sith can do that. So it is that attachment that you want to prevent something bad happening to someone that you love that leads him down the path to the dark side. That's an observation that you can make. But another lesson that I think you get there is just desire can become destructive. If you desire something too much and you're willing to disregard your morals or disregard your ethics in order to acquire that, I think that's also a path towards darkness. So Anakin's life, I think, is very important for someone who wants to associate themselves with a light side. I mean, for just to use that term, to beware, like, don't follow that path Anakin made. And I think a perfect example is Luke. I think Luke does that. Luke sort of does represent the way that Anakin should have lived. So but is there any last thing we talk about with Anakin before we move into Luke or
So,
Anakin and Darth Vader?
so something about Anakin Skywalker was that the thing is, Palpatine made sure that he in some way connected as much as he could with Anakin. This was a slow, gradual process. Like he's the puppeteer, right, in the whole story. He controls Anakin slowly. He doesn't overnight turn Anakin towards the dark side. It's very slow. The Jedi are always shunning Anakin. They're turning him down for all of his achievements. He's the greatest Jedi general. Like, you know, everyone, he's like the hero of the entire Republic in the whole
Kills
Clone
Count
War.
Dooku like
Yeah.
nothing.
And that's something staged by Palpatine himself. Like he's the one who's setting it up. He arranges himself to get kidnapped.
Such a good point, dude.
He arranges so that he gets kidnapped, and he sets them again for round 2 with Obi-Wan Kenobi, Anakin Skywalker, and versus Count Dooku again, right? The last time they got they got defeated terribly by Count Dooku when they fought, and Yoda had to come in and save them, right? At second time when Anakin finally kills Count Dooku. I think there are these small things that Palpatine does in the shadows with Anakin. Even like when he talks about, so he's very subtle.
Well, let me ask you a question. So, because you know, when you're talking about learning from Anakin's story, his biggest fault, I would say, in that sense, is he was easily manipulated. And is that something that someone can prevent? Like, was there a way for him to recognize that he was being manipulated? Because that's what Palpatine was doing. Palpatine was like, I have a goal. If I can turn this guy to the dark side, I can complete my goal. So I need to lie to him. I need to sell him dreams. I need to he manipulates Anakin, plays him like a fiddle, always does. Until the end, where where Darth Vader kills him, which I think is good. It's complete. But do you think someone can? How would Darth Vader have recognized that Palpatine was trying to manipulate him and sort of solve that problem?
So that's a very interesting dynamic, and I would say it works three-way among 3 characters that are very central to this whole idea. And first thing is, the first character I think you should look at is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Okay, he was someone probably in the entire order who, you know, said to the order, like, I'm still taking him as my apprentice, right? He violated the rules. And then he brought Anakin in, and he was always like, he saw Anakin as his own brother. Like, he talks about that. And this is something that Obi-Wan Kenobi blames himself for. Like he led to if he had been more careful with Anakin, if he had given him the right guidance and helped him out, or if he had done things a little differently, it would not have resulted in Darth Vader. Like, there's this whole arc around Obi-Wan Kenobi's life when he's just in his older years, right before he's this is around the time when Luke is a boy. What was the planet's name?
Naboo? No.
Tatooine.
Tatooine, right? On Tatooine, so like what happens is, Luke is a boy, right? And this is a good time to train him to become a Jedi, right? To fight the Empire and something. But Obi-Wan Kenobi is so conflicted with his own human heart, right? Like, oh my God, I was the one who, like, he's so much full of guilt, right? And, like, this whole, like, he messed up with raising Anakin as, you know, as his master, that he says, like, I'm not going to train Luke anymore. Like, he chooses not to until the actual movies come about for the Star Wars and all of that. Second thing is that Anakin was shunned by the Jedi Order, right? And he didn't have a lot of people to look up to, right? He didn't have a father figure in his life, right? He didn't have like most of the, like, he was looking for approval, a place to belong, right?
Yep.
Palpatine was becoming that slow figure in his life, right? That was a very easy, I would just say the situation was just right for Palpatine to slowly manipulate Anakin.
What I'm asking is, how can Anakin become self-aware and sort of
At
know,
that point?
Well, at any point before he becomes a Sith Lord, how can he become aware of Palpatine using all of these character flaws of Anakin to control him and get him to do what he wants to do? Because I feel like that applies to all of us, because at some point we may come in contact with somebody who doesn't have our best interests at heart, but they're able to influence us. They're able to push buttons here and there and then get us to do something that we didn't want to do. You know, I think it's important to be aware of that. I mean, personally in my life, I've had that happen a lot of times, where I've come into contact with characters where they said the right thing, they had the right gleam in their eye. It was hard for me to recognize signals that they didn't have my best interest at heart. Or I would say that they didn't have my best interest at heart. It's just that they had their interests a little bit, they wanted to serve their interests a little bit more. And so, I sort of associated myself with these people. And then once I saw that, they were doing things that I didn't agree with, I sort of stepped out. But, it was, I could see myself, if I didn't have that self-awareness, like, okay, I don't like that I probably would have, been down that path. Because in the beginning, you don't know. And it's when people are very charismatic, when people are, very agreeable, or when people feel needs that you are seeking, it's easy to sort of go with them and to see them as someone that's worth associating with, someone to learn from, someone to model, And so, I think the key lesson here is to recognize that, people will do that. People will do that. People will try to manipulate you. People will try to get you to serve their interest, and it's up to you to be aware and to look. To me, what that means is you can't trust anybody. Can't trust anybody. You gotta try to figure out who they really are. And if Anakin thought about it and he truly tried to discern who Palpatine really was, I think he would have seen that. I think he would have known that, okay, Palpatine has this grand vision, and I'm only a cog in that wheel. Therefore, I probably shouldn't do this, Or he would have recognized some of the lies. But he was blinded by his desire. He was blinded by his passions. But I want to go ahead and get into Luke, because I think we spent a lot of time on Anakin. And so what do you guys think about Luke? He's a cool guy, huh? I love his arc, but I want to see what you guys...
Luke is your cookie cutter hero's journey character.
Yeah.
He's been designed for that role. Yeah. So his character just...
I mean, it was done well, but still... If you're gonna see, the thing about the difference between those two is, like, with Anakin, he has so many freaking flaws that you can find some likability out of him and you can digest everything about him. But Luke, on the other hand, it's a little bit different with his case, because he grew up in a good family. He grew up in a good family, mind you. But it was once he left and came across someone like Obi-Wan Kenobi, that was around the time when the Empire found out that there was a child like this that knew something, or knew Obi-Wan Kenobi, or something along these lines. And then he decided to go after the family, and then that's where it starts the journey for Luke to become the person who he is. Then he came across the right people at right times, and something along basically those lines. I can't really put too much detail on that.
Okay, to further elaborate on that one, the reason why we like the character, like the Luke story, is because Luke is a character who's on a journey. He's exploring this world of lightsabers and lasers and like all these Death Stars and all this Empire and all these spaceships and all this. People were excited at the time when this was coming out. This was like a whole new world that was opening up to them, right? So for them, the character story was good, right? But the world was even better.
Yeah.
It was really the world, and you were just putting yourself in Luke's shoes.
Yep. Yeah.
A good example is John Wick. Have you guys watched the first John Wick?
I've seen all three.
The first one, I was really engrossed into the story because I was just fascinated by this world that, it's world building, which is also a very core thing about some of these movies, is that if you build a good world that catches the attention of your audience, that could make a great story.
They can.
So with Luke, for someone who, I guess it's more interesting if you're someone who wants to live the life that Luke lives. And I mean, like 100%, like you actually want to be a hero. Then watching Luke is just absolutely fascinating, because it sort of gives you a glimpse of what things to be aware of, what you need to accomplish, where you need to go, and some of the trials that you're going to face. I love watching just Luke's face and just his demeanor, his vibe, and his countenance. In the first movie, you recognize he's like a boy. He looks like a boy. He looks like a child almost. He's very immature. He's very naive. He's always asking questions. He doesn't know a lot. He's always like, he's kind of helpless. I mean, you can sense the talent. You can sense the potential. But he really, I mean, a great example of this is, you're talking about Luke, who really does bring balance to the Force, because he destroys Darth Vader, and he ends up, saving Darth Vader to the point where Darth Vader ends up killing Palpatine. So, that's why you have that big celebration. Luke does that. He's so strong. Luke is so strong. And if you need evidence for that, play the most recent Battlefront. The best character in that game is Luke. If you're playing online and you see a Luke coming after you, you're dead.
I don't support EA.
Yeah.
I'm putting that out there.
Dude, Luke he's a legendary character in that game, because he's just so much more stronger than a lot of the other characters. But let me bring this around, Nick. And as strong as Luke is in the first movie, he gets knocked unconscious by sand people. He gets knocked unconscious by the lowliest of lowly bandits, right? Like these people who are easily scared. All you have to do is make noise. And I think that's an illustration of where he starts and where he ends up. Because he has to be saved by Obi-Wan. He can't even protect C-3PO. And this is interesting because C-3PO ends up getting dismembered in almost every movie. I don't know what the significance of that is, but this is where he gets dismembered. He's always losing his limbs and his legs and his head. But yeah, so you see that happen. So he's helpless and he's careless. But in the second movie, you see a little bit where Luke is a little bit more confident, a little bit more assertive, but he's brash. He's sort of at the excess of virtue. On the good side. He's a perfect example of when you're brave, when you need to moderate your bravery with temperance. But he learns a little bit more from Yoda. He does start to show examples of where he's mastered the Force. He's gotten more training from Obi-Wan and Yoda. He's accomplished some things, such as destroying the Death Star. So you see him as a little bit more stronger, but there's still a sense of incompleteness. Like he still has a sense of fear. When you see just thinking about his face when he's holding on to that beam, when Darth Vader's reaching out his hand to him, and he's saying, that's impossible. You look at his face. I mean, it's full of fear. It's full of doubt. It's full of confusion. And it's in the third movie, and this is what I love about watching Luke, is the entire time he is just composed. He is just confident. There is zero fear in Luke's face in that movie. And a perfect example of this is illustrated by when, and I always jump at this, but when Luke, he turns himself into Darth Vader, right? He turns himself into Darth Vader, and then Darth Vader grabs his lightsaber. And Luke has his back turned to Darth Vader. And Darth Vader, you guys remember this? Darth Vader shoots off his lightsaber, and you hear this loud, right? Mm-hmm. And Luke, meanwhile, doesn't flinch. He just looks. He's almost. I would say it's not. To me, it's not stoic because it's confident. So it's a confidence there. You know what? He's in control, despite it seeming like he's not in control. And he just handles himself really, really well there, and really, really well throughout the Return of the Jedi, to where you see the naive boy become the competent, the confident, and strong Jedi, the embodiment of the Jedi ideal. And so that's what I love about the Luke story. And to put the cherry on top of that, he does save his father, which is, I think, like you said, part of the hero's journey. And to me, that was such a moment of completeness right there, when Darth Vader tells him, you were right. And Luke does that, and he's able to bring about, and Luke doesn't do this alone, because obviously Han Solo and what are the little bear creatures?
Wookiees.
The Wookiees?
No, they're Ewoks.
Ewoks.
Yeah. Ewoks are doing their thing, and then there's that great the battle out in space, and all of these things come together to really create the victory. But Luke plays his part really well in that, and he, there's this celebration and all of that.
Honestly, the thing about Luke, what makes him special and what makes him a cut above individuals like Anakin, because I think we pretty much summed down, Anakin has so much baggage at the time of when he joined and continued on for the rest of his life. But what made Luke special is that because of his upbringing at the time, he has more of a pure heart, a more pure soul.
Well, Nick, remember, Luke's parents, his adoptive parents, get killed. They get killed by the dark side.
See, but here's the thing. He was taught in a good lifestyle by good parents before that happened. That foundation was already made.
Yes, but it's still, he experiences the same thing in that the people that he loved most, the people that brought him up into this world, were killed. they were murdered. And not only that, but in the same movie, so these people get killed. And because Luke goes through these trials, like I disagree with that point. So the people that he looks up to gets killed. They get murdered, right? So then he turns to Obi-Wan as his new patron, as his new master, his new mentor. And so he follows Obi-Wan. And he's like, all right, well, at least I got Obi-Wan. He's going to teach me how to be a man, or he's going to teach me, that's the connection that I can feel. And then what happens to Obi-Wan? Obi-Wan gets killed. So not only does he suffer, so he's lost. But he deals with it the right way. He deals
I
with
would
it.
put it more like this, because Luke was even older than when Anakin joined. But here's the thing: he learned when he was being raised. If you look at the lifestyles of Luke's childhood versus Anakin's, you would agree with me that between the two, Luke had a much better chance to develop a good foundation and have an understanding. Unlike Anakin's, because his life was chaotic beyond recognition, and he did not have a father figure either. He didn't have a father figure. Luke did.
To add to that, Palpatine saw that as an opportunity, and he slowly moved into that role.
Exactly.
I think Luke's relationship with Obi-Wan was more of like a brother.
Either
like
a
an
brother
older-
or a mentor, while Anakin's was
I mean,
more like supplant a new father figure, or a hybrid between the two.
I don't know. The only because I see what you're saying, Nick. I understand what you mean. I mean, it does make sense. The only thing that I would say to push back a little bit on that, because I think the overall point you're right, but is that when Anakin is, how old is he when he goes into the Jedi Order?
It's like 12.
He's like I would say he's younger than that. He's like 8 years old. So from 8 to 17, he's living in a Jedi Order, Jedi maintained lifestyle. Whereas Luke is living on a farm. Luke's not doing anything. Which you could argue that sort of that humility is what ends up being what's important. That humility versus being exposed to, okay, this is good. This is what you need to do. Be good. Do all these things that are good. Whereas Luke he's a farmer. Isn't he a farmer? He's
the moisture.
What does he do?
They gather moisture. From
Yeah, they
the
gather
planet.
moisture because Tatooine is a desert planet.
Okay.
They harvest moisture from the air.
Yeah,
on
so
the
that's
desert.
kind of like a farmer.
A little bit of a
Yeah,
farmer.
in a 21st century. I mean, in a whatever 21st century, in a Star Wars, way. But I think that that's where I would agree with you, Nick. Is that there are some aspects of his upbringing that sort of give him that advantage.
Plus, in Anakin's, he was always told that he was the chosen one and that he was going to be greatness. Like lots of expectations were put onto him. Yeah. Versus Luke, on the other hand, he's like, well, I come from a life that it's not the greatest, but I'm happy.
Further add to that, Anakin fought the whole Clone Wars, right? He went from battle to battle to battle, right? It wasn't like just he fights today and it ends tomorrow. It was like years of countless battles where he had to. There's some really good stories on that as well, where he even had situations where he had, like the U.S. had situations with Vietnam or some situation like that, where it kind of like it messes up the people's head, right? The PTSD and all of these things. A lot of that also played into the role as well. So I'd probably put that there as a perspective. And the thing is, like I'll bring it back to a little bit back into the Anakin story and the contrast, to put the contrast with Luke. Anakin could have, if anything, like what happened with Palpatine, if anything happened the wrong way, Anakin would have defeated, like the Order would have, like Palpatine would have been dead, right? And the Jedi Order would have survived. Like it was just the sequence of events that eventually led to basically the whole collapse, where he was eventually pushed over the limit, where what happened was Mace Windu was about to kill Palpatine, right? And at that moment, Anakin Skywalker was like, no, we need to take him to the Senate. He needs to be judged in a proper trial. That's the Jedi way, right? But Mace Windu was like, not following the Jedi way. I'm breaking the rules, right? I'm the guy in the council who said we follow the rules, and you cannot be a council member. But like
he's too dangerous to be.
The rules are an exception for me. They're not an exception for you, right? And then Anakin's like, but that's still not right, right? And at that point, Anakin just like he cuts off Mace Windu's arm, right? And then at that moment, Palpatine rises and throws Mace Windu off the window, right? And that's the point where Anakin just finally, like, the whole trigger happens and he falls to the dark side. It's a sequence of events that had they happened a different way, right? Yeah. Anything that had changed, like had Palpatine told him a little earlier, right?
I don't know, and Nishan, I disagree. I think no matter what, it's up. It's because that's a nature versus nurture thing. I would say Anakin would have had to, regardless of what happens to him, no matter what, he should have not turned to the dark side. Like, even if it doesn't matter, Mace Windu kills Palpatine. That's not a license to become on the dark side. You know what I mean?
Well,
It's to me, and this is there's no one's right or wrong. This is no wrong. This is just my interpretation. That you can't look at the circumstances and say, oh well, it was inevitable for him to be on the dark side. Anakin lacked self-control.
That is true.
That is Anakin's fault. That's Anakin's fault. His whole life they were telling him, Anakin, you need to control yourself. You need to control yourself, and he couldn't do it. That was his problem. That was his fault. But so just to wrap up on Luke, because I want to get on this Admiral Thrawn. I mean, I want to use the restroom after I throw it to you, so save the good parts to when I come back, if you can, Nick. But I want to hear about Admiral Thrawn, because I guess we're getting kind of long in the video. But the last thing that I would say about Luke that is super important is that he had to accept the hero's journey. He had to accept, because you remember he didn't want to go. He was like, "Oh well, I gotta stay here with my family. I gotta get some more connotation." In the beginning, he was very hesitant about going, but he ultimately accepts that hero's journey, and then it goes on to do all of these great things. So if there is that opportunity for anybody else, it's important to be aware to seize that. When destiny comes calling, for lack of a better term, when there is that moment, like Eminem talks about, you got to seize it. When that comes, you can't sort of try to say, oh well, I'll do it next year or I'll do it later. If you have a sense that there's this moment in your life where things could drastically change for the better. I think it's important to try to recognize that and go ahead and accept it and say yes. As long if you feel there's a right thing to it, and it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to do, but it is a difference between being a farmer and being a Jedi hero.
A little bit addition to that, just to clarify a little bit more on the hero's journey. The hero's journey is your stereotypical RPG character. Okay, he's on a farm. He's just farming, right? And then there's a call to this character, right? A call. And in Star Wars, it's where he gets the Princess Leia's message from R3PO, right? The Luke gets that message and like, oh, I need to so it's a call like that comes to any RPG hero, right? And the hero first must say, I'm not gonna do it, right? He must say that's the part of the journey. Yeah. He refuses the call because he says, I'm content with my life because that's how humble I am as a character, right? And then the disaster happens, okay? And the disaster here is like the Empire comes, they burn his whole farm, they kill his aunt and uncle, and then the hero must take the call. Yeah. So he must take the mantle of like the journey, the responsibility that he didn't want to take, but was thrown upon the hero. The hero wasn't so like, this, oh yeah, I'm gonna go on an adventure. It was more like, I must take this adventure for the sake of good, right? So that's the hero's journey. It shows that the hero is humble. He is being forced to do this. He's not in the option of choice, like he must do it. So that's the situation with the opportunity that all of these hero tropes must follow. And there are some mutations towards it, some small slight changes, deviations from the journey, but overall it just comes full circle. And that's pretty much it.
I don't know why. This is reminding me of a real life example of Joan of Arc. A little bit. It kind of reminds me of that story where, she's just a farm girl in France in the middle of the 100 Years' War, and she's being called upon by God by God and a number of the saints to go out and save France and help the French heir apparent to take the throne and save France from the British. From the English, and is able to accomplish that through that guidance, or something like that as well.
Yeah. So I think the last thing I'll say about Luke before I move on is he always needs others to help him. In the first movie, you see that Han Solo really does save the day when he comes in, right, and blasts everybody. And he says, "Go get him, kid. You're clear for the whatever it is," right? Saves him there. In the second movie, his friends have to come back and save him while he's dangling from that thing. And in the third movie, Darth Vader saves him. So it's important, you can't do it yourself, no matter how strong or how much of a Jedi you are. You have to recognize that you're going to need help. So let's move on to Admiral Thrawn. Nick, you have the floor. I'll be back. I'll make it as quick as I can.
Oh boy, we're going to talk about the famous Blue Admiral.
Don't say blue. Chiss Admiral.
I know, but everyone remembers him as the blue guy. But you're right.
But give him the love he deserves.
You're right. Let's be official about this. Well, Admiral Thrawn, he's not mentioned in the movies, but he's very famous in the lore and through a lot of the Star Wars fans. And actually, throughout in the Star Wars fan base, they wanted that movie over the Han Solo movie. They wanted it Admiral Thrawn or Kenobi. And the reason for that is that when Admiral Thrawn, before he was even an admiral, he came from the Chiss Ascendancy. If I remember right, was a monarchy system in the unknown regions west of the Republic, or later on the Galactic Empire. And he was found out when a number of, I'm going by Star Wars Legends, which is considered non-canon as of recently, said that some of the Jedis that escaped through Order 66 escaped, and the Chiss Ascendancy found them, and then that's how he came across Palpatine. Then Palpatine took a liking to him, brought Admiral Thrawn to the Academy, and in the Academy there was a bunch of discrimination between of the various races, and the Chiss were one of these people. Also, the Chiss were very rare in that
part of the
livelihood.
galaxy,
Yeah, because they're fairly isolationist. So they don't rarely go out. So when this one did, when Thrawn did come out, he was discriminated by a lot of people, saying, you know, you're not from this area, what could you know? And he's able to beat all of their butts on multiple occasions, and even stood up to some of the people like the Grand Moff Tarkin, and even individuals like Palpatine and Darth Vader. And Thrawn was the only non-Force sensitive person that could ever rival any of those two Sith characters. Would you like to add in a little bit on Thrawn?
Thrawn's
Admiral
genius.
Thong?
Admiral Thrawn.
Oh.
Let's be official here, guys.
Okay.
So Admiral Thrawn is he's a tactical genius.
For
okay?
sure.
And the way how he conducts, he analyzes things very carefully. He is the type of general who studies his opponents, right? That's the best way to understand Thrawn. He will read everything about his opponents, their culture, their identities, their language, what festivals they're celebrating, and he'll even respect his enemies. That's a very rare thing.
That is.
Everyone is trained to hate their enemies, right? All generals will be like, oh, we must hate the enemy, right? But he's one of those generals who doesn't necessarily hate the enemy. He just sees them as a hindrance, right? Towards his objectives or whatever that might be. One of those things that set Thrawn apart is, have you watched, this is Star Wars Rebels. Have you seen
Yeah, I have. That's what got me interested in him.
Yeah, so in Star Wars Rebels, there's this one scene where there's this Twilight artifact that him and his lieutenant, they find it, right, in one of the rebels room or something. They're investigating, and they're like, you're rebels, right? They're like, no, we're just traders, we're just merchants, we're just doing trade, right? And so they're investigating some of these rebels, right? And so one of his lieutenants picks up this artifact, and he's like, and Thrawn just goes like, oh, don't you know that this is a festival they celebrate? It's very sacred to the Twi'leks, and like this is a totem of their culture, and he's like, well, alien, whatever, right? And he like there's this so in Star Wars universe, they have this very strong xenophobia, right? They hate aliens, like, and this whole philosophy of like, humans are just better. So there's a lot of prejudice, right? And so Thrawn just looks at his lieutenant with this anger in his eyes. He's just like, I'm about to murder you, because he's just so angry. Like how can you think like that, right?
Yeah, how dare you think like that?
Yeah, you are the one who's beneath me in terms of your cognitive, like the way you think, right?
Right. It's like what you should, what would you know? I'm the freaking admiral of one of the largest fleets in the galaxy.
It's a lot of things that the thing is, Thrawn is not someone who will think he's less than anyone. Does that make sense? Even if other people think that he's less than them, he's not gonna think like that. In fact, he's gonna think the opposite. He's gonna think that they're lesser than him because they think like that.
Yeah.
So Thrawn has a very dynamic character. And he's one of those guys who wants good for he's actually not necessarily an evil. character. He
Yeah.
even though he works for the Empire, he's not an evil character. It's just that Palpatine saw his talents and brought him up into becoming an admiral.
And another interesting bits of knowledge involving Thrawn, what also makes him special, especially in terms of his intelligence, when you mentioned that the Twi'lek artifact, what he would do whenever it came to any of his opponents, not only would he learn everything about them, but he would collect either works of art, books, or in case of the Twi'leks, various artifacts that are important to that society, and that way he has a better understanding of those opponents, of those individual opponents, and be able to act on that and basically play them like a fiddle. And another thing that made him real interesting is that he kept a set of I'm going to call them lizards, and these lizards, they have this ability to negate the Force. So if any of Jedi or even the Sith, if they were to come up and try to assassinate him, they couldn't use the Force to do it. Because those lizards would be able to negate it. Like, they have that kind of power. And the only reason why he died after the fall of the Empire, because he was winning the war against the Republic very easily while being undermanned, outgunned, out-resourced, everything, but he was still winning the war. Yeah, he's that good. And the only reason why he died and eventually the Empire fell apart to become a remnant, which you would see in the later trilogies, was that one of the generals under him decided to kill him. Decided to assassinate him with some blasters. That was it. That's what got him.
Anticlimactic.
Well, I made it sound anticlimactic, but it was kind of a process to do it.
The blasters, you expect it to be this great big,
Yeah, because he just showed up.
An up-and-coming admiral.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, is there any character flaws that this guy had, or was it just he was just a regular badass through and through?
If you
That's a good question.
That is a good question. It's hard to say because Thrawn is a very dynamic and complex character. It's very hard to find his flaws.
I think I got it.
Even his flaws look like strengths.
I think I would say his strength is partially his weakness. I would say. Because, yeah, he's super smart, but the thing is, he's one of those types that in order to think that much, your brain has to be, how do I say it, calibrated to think beyond what people would think. So in a sense, if you were trying to compare an average person's brain from someone like Admiral Thrawn's, that average person would say, well, Admiral Thrawn, he overthinks things. Only the most complicated scenarios could he actually do well, or in that certain field. And even though that anticlimactic scenario happened, mind you, that was one of the simplest situations that could happen. And also the most likely as well. Yeah. So for him, it's that he overthought.
He missed it.
It didn't catch it because he didn't consider that as something that could take him down, or that he had ways of counteracting that.
That's a good point, Nick. That's a good point.
So, just a quick question. I do know that he was exiled from Chiss Empire, right? What was the reason for it? They did not like something about him. If I recall.
I think it was with the case when I mentioned about the Jedi that were running away, because the Chiss Ascendancy, the monarchy, the government of the time, Jordan, they didn't like interacting with other civilizations, because what happened in their history was, if I remember right, it was a bunch of humans from the core that decided to go exploring. They got stranded on the
Outbound Voyager. Was that with the Jedi as there were some Jedi masters who made this network of it was like a ship that was designed to go out explore outside the galaxy.
That situation was after this. But the reason why the Chiss Ascendancy became a thing was that a number of explorers went into the unknown regions, and they got stranded, and they were forced to live on an ice planet. And that's why they got the blue skin. That's why, because apparently it was easier for them to adapt in that situation with that, and they evolved and became this high intellect type of society. But because that was the only society that they've known, they didn't like the idea of interacting with others.
Well, we're going to get into the geopolitics, at number 4. But for number 3, let's go ahead and talk about, let's take a step back, because we've been talking about some serious, heavy shit. Let's go ahead and, take an easier route and do what everyone who watches Star Wars instinctively does and says, "Oh man, I want that." Look at that in the video. You mean so? What I mean is, let's talk about the technology of Star Wars.
Oh,
right?
I thought
You're
we were gonna
talking-
say I could get a Wookiee for a
You're
friend.
talking, yeah, you're talking Millennium Falcon light speed. You know, I mean, I heard he can run what does the Kessel run in 7 parsecs or something like that. Lightsabers. I mean, you're talking robotic arms. Robots. I love the robots in the movie. These robots have personalities. Are you kidding me? Sort of the different spaceships, the from small to large. I mean, what are you guys' favorite technologies in Star Wars? And then from there we'll go on to talk about where is humanity right now in achieving the development of these technologies.
I'm not gonna say the Death Star because that's way too simple of an answer.
I mean,
And plus, that's way too expensive.
you just change the name, call it to the Life Star, and it'd be okay. Right?
Oh, that would be funny, but no. Lightsabers,
It's just the name that does it.
yeah, definitely lightsabers or spaceships.
I want my lightsaber. What's taking scientists so long? I want my damn lightsaber. Guys, let's get on it. All right? Guys over there, what's a YouTube channel where the scientists are hanging out at?
There's Beyond Science.
Beyond Science, let's get on it.
But then there's a couple others. I think Beyond Science tried. I think they tried doing something like that a little bit. I don't remember
What's that
exactly.
guy from Mythbusters? He's got a famous Adam Savage. Adam Savage. He's
Oh, yeah.
creating all these things in his garage. Where's the lightsaber? Let's go, Adam. So, but anyway, that's my beef. I'm angry at science.
I think
I want my lightsaber, and
If
it's
I'm-
taking too damn long for me to get my lightsaber.
I think I've heard some references by the U.S. military or a couple others that they were going into laser technology, and that's probably the closest, or plasma energy. And if I remember right, lightsabers are just basically crystals with heated plasma in it. But it has a special type of gravity field, I think it was, and that's why it keeps that blade look. That's why it has so basically it has its own gravitational force.
Yeah, to keep it from falling. Okay.
That's the theory.
Yeah.
That's the theory.
That's the problem. Is it's hard for us to create that sort of gravitational.
We don't necessarily have the
strength.
Yeah, we don't really have a gravitational technology, although there seems to be talks that it's in the works right now.
Yeah. Well, my biggest thing is that, in terms of like what we have done, is in this particular instance, we've actually outdone Star Wars in some ways, and that is with holographic technology. Because I don't know if you guys remember, but about 3 years ago, there was a concert in Coachella. I think it was Coachella, where they actually revealed some holographic technology, and it was Tupac. So Tupac, I don't know if you
Yep.
guys... if you
I know what you're talking about.
But I mean, this was a hologram, and it was 3D looking, and it looked lifelike. I mean, they gave him too much muscles, and that was a controversy because he was not that strong in real life. So why did they make him this strong in hologram?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, he was running from one side of the stage to the other, and it was literally like he was just right there. And this hologram looked so real. I mean, it truly felt like he was up there performing, and it was better than R2D2's Leia, little translation,
Right. I remember.
But it wasn't as
oh,
good
yeah.
as the Jedi Council where they're all in their seats. It wasn't that good. I mean, it's kind of close to it, but
I remember about almost, I want to say of 2 years ago or something, maybe a little more. I was at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, and I came across this almost hologram. Like, it was basically a screen, but it was interactive. So it was voice recognition type of thing, and it had the recordings of of one of the survivors that lived in Poland when the Germans invaded during the Second World War. And I would ask the hologram, I would call it a hologram, questions, and it would respond. Now, mind you, it was very scripted, but
cool.
it responded extremely well.
Do you think augmented reality is pretty much our answer to that? It's going to be...
You mean VR?
No, like augmented reality, where you put on glasses and you can see people, in your real world, because these holograms are in the real world. They're not putting on helmets; they're in the real world. But you might, put on glasses or something like that, or have, because to me that's what it is. If you augmented reality, when you've seen the demos of where it's done really well, that's kind of what it looks like. Is these things manifest themselves in your real environment. So I think as we progress down that technology tree, I think we'll be able to have things that are better than just this sort of blue, whitewashed image. I think we'll be able to interact or things like that. Sean, is there any Star Wars technologies that you're, anxious to have or to see?
Speaking of technology, I want to know what is like. Do you guys have a favorite ship that you might want? Because for me, Millennium Falcon. For me, it's the. I think I really like the technology of the Mon Calamari cruisers.
Yes, I like those.
So these cruisers, so the Empires, you might think that their battle cruisers are like just huge, right? But the problem is they're just there to be a sign of force, right? The Mon Calamari cruisers are designed for defense as well as offense. They're just incredible pieces. It's why the Rebel Alliance won the war against, and they were able to hold out so well against the entire Empire, despite having this huge gap in numbers.
Yeah, because the Mon Calamari, they were the only other society that, one, did not bend down to the Empire, and they were the only other society that had shipyards capable of building such craft. Because most of the other shipyards were nationalized. And Palpatine was just not able to get to the Mon Calamaris, because when that was taking place, the Mon Calamari, they kind of separated themselves and then went on the diplomatic route. So they didn't say we were supporting the Rebel Alliance, but they secretly were.
Well, we'll get into the geopolitics.
Golly, those fish people.
I just want to talk about the technologies, try to cut it, because we're like an hour and 30 minutes in, so we kind of got to hit lightning round. So spaceships were one. I really I thought this was interesting, and it's in Revenge of the Sith where Anakin and Obi-Wan are sort of chasing the person who tried to kill Padme in her sleep, I think. And they're chasing him, and that city, you guys know where that is, where that planet right there, because it has like a multi-tiered.
That's Coruscant.
So it has like a multi-tiered city structure. You know what I mean? Where you have all of these flying cars or flying ships or flying vehicles, and they're stacked like this. And then you also have like different bridges to where, so the city is not just a ground level city, it's like a multi-level city. And I love that aspect of to me, I love the civil engineering of a lot of these cities, like the Cloud City. I love the way that they were able to do that. I love the aesthetics of that. The architecture is obviously really fascinating for a lot of these places. Like I said, I like the robots. I really love what they did with the robots in the movies. I think C-3PO is I think he would be really useful, if not annoying. It'd be annoying to have him all the time, but he'd be really useful, because he feels like he can do everything. What else? What are some technologies that I'm missing from Star Wars?
The floating cities.
Floating cities, yeah.
Floating cities.
That was in episode 5.
Yeah.
They're like holocrons as well, like you were talking about the holographs. They're like these miniature holograms. They're like tapes or recorders for the Star Wars universe. So they just you just play it, and someone's hologram comes and they teach you. It's like a video teaching thing.
Oh, I almost forgot. I don't know if it was the U.S. military again, but in general, scientific community, they said that out of all of the Star Wars universe, the most likely, one of the most interesting and probably one of the most practical type of things would have been using the flying cities in places like Venus or Mercury because of the atmosphere. It would use as ways of getting the cities to levitate up in the upper atmosphere.
Yeah, and I think we have blasters. They're really big. We have blasters that are just like on a super massive industrial scale platform. And when they shoot, they don't shoot color. They don't shoot red or green. It's just it's invisible. So I think those are some really cool technologies in Star Wars, and I like that. I like when there's a futuristic movie that the creator really goes into depth about technologies that don't exist in our time, because it pushes humanity to imagine what the world could be, to have like a visual representation. So it makes it a little bit more concrete. It makes it a little bit more like we can say, okay, let's try to develop a lightsaber. Now what do we need versus having to think of a concept of a lightsaber? I think that's the first step. So Star Wars is really fascinating, and for any scientists or engineers out there, I think those technologies are worth pursuing in a lot of ways. I think that they do make they advance society in a lot of ways. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about, Nick, you can go ahead and take the floor for this one initially, is the geopolitics of Star Wars. Because at the end of the day, that is the structure for which this story is played out. It's a struggle for power. It's a struggle between ideas of how the global, galactic civilization should look. So what are some interesting?
Wait, okay. Well, the thing is interesting. Well, I'm going to go off of the Republic a little bit. And for the Republic, what's interesting for them is that it's very much a democratic system, obviously. They have their Senate and they have the Chancellor. But then there are the subsections, or I guess you could say the planet or system-wide. And each of the senators, they are representatives of the planetary system, not the planets themselves. It's of the systems. And those systems have their own mini governments. So I guess the best example of this would be something like the UN, where the Republic is the UN, and all of the senators or representatives in the UN are leaders of those systems or countries. So give or take. It's not a confederacy, but it's very much a federation. And then you got the separatists, which are more of a merchant faction, of a merchant confederacy. So I don't exactly know how, if you could put a mixture between the United States and the no.
More institutionalized.
It's more institutionalized. If I had to make an example, it'd probably be like the merchant republics of medieval Venice.
Take like the American Civil War, the North versus the South.
I would say something like that too. Well, actually, I would put more like, try to imagine a merchant republic version of the early days of the 13 colonies when they gained independence. That confederacy. That's the best example I can give. Try to imagine a merchant Venice in the Articles of Confederation before the Constitution was made.
What about like during the 17th century, the 16th century, 15th, and a little bit of the 19th, how the pirates kind of supported themselves independently?
That
pirates and privateers, a little bit. They kind of have some associations to governments, but they're also basically trying to fill their own economic needs.
No, those are different. The pirates are a very different case because that's more of gangs that work together, that follow a set of principles or etiquette. So I would say for the pirates, probably a better fit for them in the Star Wars universe is, no, I would say it'd probably be the Tusken Raiders on Tatooine. The closest would be either them or
Jabba the Hutt, like Jabba the Hutt.
I was going to say Jabba the Hutt.
Yeah.
And if I had to make a distant third, maybe the Mandalorians. But Mandalorians would probably fit more with the Prussians.
Okay, so yeah. So the trade federations are a little bit more structured. And
it's definitely more structured, but it's very trade based.
Okay.
It's very merchant based.
So where do they fit in relation to the Republic? Are they like a rogue? Are they part of the Republic? Are they commissioned by the Republic?
They were major companies, hence the Federation part.
Was there a symbiotic relationship?
No. They were part of the Senate. Like they had representatives of their own in the Senate. So major companies had representation in the government.
That's interesting. That's an interesting right there. That's an interesting feature. We don't have.
Well,
at least not overtly. Corporations deserving to be represented in the Senate.
That's kind of a thing. It's kind of a thing. Well, I guess I could say real life examples would probably be something like the PLO, terrorist organization during the 70s and 80s, which became a political party in Lebanon today. That's probably a decent example of a situation like that. Or we could say late 1800s United States with companies like Standard Oil, U.S. Electric, or the Dole Company in the Cold War. Even though they weren't necessarily official parties, they had the power of parties. So they definitely had representation in the government.
So to further clarify, and just as I think I'm going to cover some of the things you already covered, but it's my version of it. So the way how it happens is very much like a democratic process, and the Republic is pretty much that. The Republic is supposed to be a representation. It's supposed to have senators from all of the worlds and all of the systems, right? But the situation is very much like in the Republic. It's pretty much you have the core worlds of the galaxy, which are the worlds that are center of the galaxy, and
the most prosperous.
And then you have worlds that are at the very outer edge of the rim of the galaxy, right? If the galaxy is a disk, then at the very outside you have the rim worlds, they call it RIM. because it's the part of the rim, and these worlds are primarily separatist people from these
Yeah,
worlds.
they're either that or they're colonies.
Colonies, right?
Yeah.
And then in the core worlds, you have a lot more human population, okay? And the human population is a lot more centralized. They believe in
Yeah.
strong centralized government. They believe in the republic and all of that, right? And they don't like free trade that the outer worlds practice, right? So they want to place more restrictions, more regulations for the benefit of the centralized government, right?
Yep.
Bring all that tax money towards the center of the republic, right? So it benefits the core worlds, but the outer worlds are like always suffering, right? Because of all these regulations. Now in come these guys, they're like, oh, we are the Intergalactic Banking Federation. They're like some big corporation, multinational corporation that trades with all over, right? And they join the separatist factions, right? The people on the outside, like, hey, we also want to join your groups because we are also like, we also believe in free trade and all of that. So they are not, so the Intergalactic Banking Trade Guild are not, they're not, like, these are the guys that took over Naboo. Do you remember in the which caused Padme to escape, right?
Yep.
Those are the guys for the banking guild, right?
Oh, yep.
And the thing is, like, these guys are not separatists. They're just kind of like using the separatists and their idea of like, we are being exploited, we don't like it, right? So an example of today's world would be like, imagine if the U.S. we have like the center of the U.S. and then we have the coastal cities of the U.S., right? Let's say the center of the U.S. starts making policies that only benefit the people in the center, right? Or like in the north of the U.S. we make policies that only favor the north, and it completely messes up everything in the south, right? So the people in the south have this disgruntlement, right? Now in comes some multinational corporation says, hey, we are going to take over Texas or something, right? Now let's say Texas has a queen or something, or like a very important figure. The governor of Texas escapes to the north and says, we need help and all of that, right? So that could be a very good premise for the Star Wars example of like some real world example.
Oh, I just thought of a better example of the Trade Federation. British East India Company.
Oh yeah, exactly.
I would say they'd be, because they were definitely part of the Republic, but they were disenfranchised by what you had mentioned in the core, that they, as long as it was beneficial to the core, that's all that mattered for them. Anywhere else outside of that area, the less concern. Plus, the Rim worlds, they're also typically the ones where other nations that were not part of the Republic, for instance, the Hutt space would be one of them, or where piracy would always be, as well as smugglers.
So you have a situation where the separatists and the business interests start to align, and they want to sort of change the way things are, or they want to sort of they want to set up the intergalactic system to where their interests are more advocated for. And I think to do this, they turn to the Empire, right? To Palpatine. How do they then fit in? What does that relationship look like? Because that's pretty much the beginning of the end of the Republic, as we know it, is when these three, this triumvirate force comes together. But obviously, the Empire is just using them. The Empire is more stronger than them because they're able to. I think at the end they kill the separatists. But
the leadership.
yeah.
Yes.
So, but how did that relationship start to form? How did the three parties sort of think it was going to work, at least in theory? And then what happened to the point to where how did they actually execute the power seizure?
So to correct you on the sequence of events, at this point the Emperor had not come about. The Palpatine was like in the shadows. He was at this point working more or less like a senator in the Senate, right?
Yep.
And at that time you had other chancellor. I forgot his name, but he was in power.
Oh yeah, before Palpatine.
Yeah, and Palpatine was just like a senator, right? But he was also the Darth Sith Lord, right? So what he did was that he told he controlled basically the Intergalactic Banking Federation from the shadows, right? The Separatists had no idea about this. The Separatists had their own problems with the Republic that they were going with, and he just took advantage of the situation that had built up. He basically told the Intergalactic Banking Federation, hey, you guys go to this planet Naboo, who's in the center of the Rim world and the core worlds. Okay, so it's like a political hotbed, right? So it's inside the core system, so it's kind of like considered like Naboo is kind of like considered as part of the core worlds, which is where Padme Amidala is from, right? So that's when we get the first movie for the Star Wars starts from, where the Intergalactic Banking Federation takes their droid army and they take over Naboo, right? And Padme Amidala escapes with Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi, and they land on Tatooine where they meet Anakin, right? So, and this is all Palpatine doing it from the shadows, right? And eventually, and eventually this whole situation leads to the escalation where the Chancellor gets like everyone, the Queen Padme Amidala basically puts a vote of no confidence in the Senate at the current Chancellor. Okay, that's like, you don't have the faith of the Senate. You don't have, you're not giving us any army to free Naboo. You cannot defend the core worlds, right? You are weak, right? So they go about to free their Naboo there, and there's the whole battle scene that happens in the first movie, right? So that's basically kind of like Palpatine then takes power to become the next Chancellor of the Senate. That's his moves he's making, right? And at the same time, there's this whole Sifo Dyas incident that he has been planning for many years, to the building of the clone army, right? Yeah. The clone army was a construct of Palpatine himself. So what he wanted, what the situation was happening was Jedi Master Sifo Dyas, he saw just how Republic was just doing things, and he was like, this is going to escalate into the war. The Jedi Order is not doing anything to control the situation at all. So Sifo Dyas just went to, I believe, where's the clone? Al Kamino to make the clone army. He says, hey, the Republic needs a clone army, right? And so the cloners on Kamino, Kaminoans, they say, okay, we'll build you a clone army, right? Yeah. Palpatine finds out about this, right? And he sends his apprentice, Dooku. Dooku is his apprentice at this time, right? So Palpatine sends Dooku to kill Sifo Dyas, right? And so he takes down Sifo Dyas' ship on another planet. So, but like at the same time, Palpatine tells the Kaminoans, hey, put this chip on all of the clones and give them a set of orders, like 127 or some amount of orders. And Order 66 was one of those orders where like you must kill all the Jedi, right? There was one more order which was the other way around.
I think it was Order 65 or 67 or something.
Yeah. One of those orders where it was the other way around. You must kill the whole Republic, like the whole Senate.
Yeah, especially the Chancellor.
Yeah, kill the Chancellor. This was in the case of the event.
So are these soldiers? It's an automatic thing. They cannot disobey these orders, or are they? Well, they're in on. They're just their allegiance is to the person who gave them orders.
Actually,
like
sorry, you know this one.
So the thing about the clones is that once the chip effects, like as soon as the order is initiated, like it's their instinctive drive. They everything just shuts down and they're all thinking, right? Some clones who had a little bit of more personality were able to take it out. Some clones just believe it's a false order, like it's a wrong order, so they were able to trick themselves out of the whole effect, right? But that was a very few rare cases. And then there was the Omega Squad. There was this squad of like CIA clones, commandos, right, who chose not to follow because they just had such strong independent quality of Jango Fett. They were designed to be like that, so they were able to so that was just Palpatine's whole move. The Naboo planet incident, the whole clone army construction is just Palpatine, the whole story controlling everything. He's just taking advantage of a situation where the Separatists and the Republic are not working together. Like they have this tension, right? And he's just stoking the flames of fire, getting both the sides to go to war when the Clone War start. And he then makes more of a like, in the words of Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, chaos is a ladder, right? And that's a Machiavellian approach, right? You create chaos and then you rise above, and you create this ladder of success for yourself.
The only reason that the Jedi Order was able to, eventually figured out that Palpatine was doing everything from the shadows, because before Windu died, no, a little bit, when Windu died, that's when Palpatine finally cements his position as the Emperor. Kind of makes you ask the question, how did the Order figure this out? And this is the kicker, and this is where it comes in for the clones. Because what happened was there was a power outage and during a mission, and the chip was shot. The chip got shotted out. And when it short-circuited, that clone was acted to go and kill the Jedi that was within his immediate vicinity. And right when he was about to kill the Jedi, the other clones went out and dogpiled him and figured out what was going on. So then those the most famous of the clones took that chip out and then sent it to the council for them to investigate, and that's how they were able to figure it out. But it was too little, too late.
Let me ask you guys this question here. So, in your opinion, Nishant, do you think that Palpatine was justified, or do you think that, you know, in a normal human situation, the Separatists would have done what they should have done? Like, do you feel like this was something that, you know, it was sort of, they had their arguments, they had justifiable reasons to try to create the chaos, to try to seize power, or was it all just about, you know, pride or something like that?
The thing about Palpatine is that he was like, he took a bad situation and made it worse. That's Palpatine basically in a nutshell. And he just, so the thing is that this idea of prejudice in the Star Wars universe, it was there even during the time of the Republic. It's just during the time of the Empire, it got on a whole 0 to 10 level, right? Palpatine was just actively like getting rid of the Xenos that he did not agree with. And so and because he believed it created maximum amount of hate and anger in the Force, so it created more power for him, like people suffering.
Let me rephrase the question, because when a government no longer can govern effectively, competently, justly, then it is, you know, the responsibility of people that are being governed under that system to rebel, to create new institutions, to better represent themselves that they feel is in a more just manner. So. How much of this restructuring of the geopolitics in this you know movie, or in this series of movies, how much of it was just gross incompetence of the Republic? How much of it was the Republic's fault? How much of it was a just cause on the side of the factions? Sort of try to make that a little bit more realistic for for people out there. Like, how much of this, you know. Because obviously I don't want to just retell the Star Wars story, because people can watch the movies, you know what I mean? But I think that you set up perfectly enough information to where now we can delve into looking at the power dynamics and the power structures and try to equate those into our day and lives, because like, to me, it seems like the Republic was making mistakes. They weren't representing the Separatists in the proper way. So, you know, what were some of the ways that the Republic wasn't governing effectively, and sort of that led inevitably to Palpatine, you know, having power and all these things?
So the most core important thing about the Republic at this point was corruption. There was a lot of money that was being made, and greed is the enemy of all good systems that come into play, because people are people, and eventually power corrupts. Money is a huge factor in it. You know, a lot of these matters were just being ignored, right? When someone who you don't even consider as human, right, comes and makes a plea like, hey, I need help, would you really listen to them? Or would you listen to some other guy who comes to you and he says, hey, I'm the banker and I'm going to give you this much money and I'm going to support you in your campaign. Just ignore this guy. I'm taking resources from his planet, making a lot of money. I'm going to give you in on the cut, right?
Okay.
So you're just gonna be like, okay, yeah, sure.
That's why the Rebel Alliance, with the exception of individuals like the Mon Calamari and a couple other individuals, the Rebel Alliance was never really that big. And they didn't really win a lot of battles either. They were really really poor when it came to fighting something like the Empire. And in many respects, the Empire was actually very well liked by people. Very well liked by the entire civility. The entire population supported them, and the reason why was because what the Empire brought was a growing economy, a defense force, jobs, and no piracy or a lack of smuggling in those areas. And be able to go up to the huts, tell them, you know, stop doing all of this stuff that they're doing. You know, basically all of these type of things. And with the military industrial complex that they had, it served as a perfect job recruitment ability. Because one of the ways that, at least on the earth, sometimes the way that revolutions or rebellions even happen sometimes is that the people become disenfranchised. And then they try to seek a purpose or a way to make their lives better. And if the government can't do it, then they will do it themselves. Or they will follow someone who they believe will be able to do it. And what Sean said earlier, the Republic was getting corrupt through various means. And the Trade Federation was one of the organizations that kind of saw a little bit with it and got disenfranchised as well. So that's why they became separatists, because they liked the idea of going independent, and they were being supported by the banking federation that Palpatine took over. So And in terms of the population, with the government being corrupt and only towards the core, the mid and rim worlds, and even parts of the core, they didn't like the current government as it was. And also being in a state of war.
Let me ask you this, Nick. So, what is two more things that I think we have to cover in the geopolitics is the difference between the empire and the old system, and then talk about why did the rebellion happen? What did they not like about the empire governing system? But first, let's go ahead and start with how did the government structure, the rule structure, how did that look like under the empire versus under the republic?
What do you mean?
Well, because like for an example, they said it's no longer going to be you're not going to be represented.
Oh.
It's going to be a governor.
Okay.
Right? So it's going to be governors.
Okay, here's the thing.
What's the difference between the empire?
Here's the thing. In the more rebellious regions, it was a governorship. In places, especially in the outer and some parts of the mid.
Who appointed the governors?
Palpatine.
Hold on, but let me continue on, because I only said in the mid and outer rim. Parts of the mid. But from parts of the mid to the core, they had the Senate. The Senate was still there.
Okay.
It didn't have the power. Basically, a close example of this would be the State Duma in the Russian Empire before they fell apart to the communists. That's the perfect scenario. The Senate was there, but they had little to no power at all when the empire was formed.
Kind of like a Roman Senate, like an Roman Empire Senate.
A little bit. It had mixtures of a Roman Senate with a little bit of the Soviet Union, and if I want to say Hitler's Germany to a lesser extent. Yeah, had some workings of the Nazi system, but with a structure that is closer to communism or the Roman Empire.
But doesn't in the first movie, in the fourth movie, they actually dissolve all of the Senate. They actually dissolve. I think that's one of the things in the fourth.
That
movie.
was one of the episode 4?
Yeah. So there's this scene where the commanders are talking to Darth Vader and they're having a conference, and then they're like, "This is going to increase the opposition inside the Senate," and then Palpatine or Darth Vader says, "We have dissolved the Senate. This is officially an empire system." They dissolve the Senate. I think that's the final thing that they do in the fourth, fifth, and sixth movie.
Mind you, this is about 19 years, almost 20 years since the beginning of the Empire to Episode 4. Mm-hmm. So, mind you, once you
so it changes.
Yeah, the only reason why the Senate is still there is so that the core, it will not start an immediate civil war.
Gotcha.
That's the reason. So, once they were defanged, everybody's going to slowly forget why the Senate's even there, and that's where you get the argument it's being dissolved, or they're actually referring to the fact that even though the Senate is there, it has dissolved the power. Yeah. So they don't have teeth. So the Senate could still be there, but it is effectively dissolved.
So the system under the Chancellor Palpatine, I guess he's the Emperor now, right? The Sith Lord. How does that? Is it just he sets the rules? So like, how does that look different from? So does he solve the problems that the Outer Rim had? Does he solve the problem? Because you guys said a lot of people like this. Mm-hmm. Does he solve the problems of the business interest? Mm-hmm.
So on that, are we looking at it from political or economics?
Both.
So I'll start off from the economics then. So the thing is, Palpatine had this huge military spending. The Death Star was like a huge taxation system in the whole galaxy. It cost us so much money and resources and credits to build it, so much resources and manpower just to even operate the whole thing. It was a huge drain on resources, and it often came at the expense of the outer worlds and rim worlds who were often exploited. The Wookiees were essentially all of them were enslaved to build and work on the Death Star, where Tarkin pretty much worked them all to death. And for that, because he was able to do that, he basically met all of his quotas for the construction. Okay, and so because he was so ahead in getting that part of the Death Star construction done, this made Palpatine very happy with Tarkin. That's why Tarkin rose through the ranks and all of that. And when Vader was like, "Can I kill Tarkin?" right? And Palpatine was like, "No, except for that one, you can kill anyone." Right? And so that's just how it shows, like Tarkin rose through the ranks as well. So it was a huge taxation. Like the army that Emperor Palpatine was trying to build. It was a cheap quality army that was huge in numbers. They were going for a victory through numbers. The Empire's military was designed to be a show of force.
Because
right?
Partially because the clones at the time, one, they had a shortened lifespan, so they would become old men by the time they were in their 20s or even 30s. So by this point, a lot of them had died in after consolidating their rule and defeating the separatists, because they did stop production of the clones, partially because the Kaminoans, I'm sorry, I messed up on the name earlier, but the Kaminoans, they kind of figured out a little bit, and they were afraid that their privately run enterprise of being one of the only cloning societies, because their race is based off of cloning. But anyway, they realized that that Palpatine was going to go after them because the Kaminoans were the only group that could actually build an army that could have competed with the Empire. So they had to go consolidate power again, but the Kaminoans figured this out, so they built their own army. And throughout this war, the Kaminoans were utterly destroyed, and their factories to continue with cloning.
That leads into the last point that I wanted to make on this is, so why did people not like the Empire? What were the things that were wrong with the Empire? Why did it need to be destroyed?
Outer Worlds.
So one of the things is overtaxation. That never makes you popular with anyone, right? And if your exploitation of resources from one group, right? It could be pollution of the environment, could be taking resources and then enslaving a whole race of people just to use them as for labor. Like, all of these things are not going to make you happy, right? Palpatine had a whole, I'm going to say, Keynesian model of, like, you know, have all this military spending, but then you're only spending on military. You're not producing any actual goods that the economy can use, right? That produces some form of utility and happiness, raises that level of happiness across your population. So, and there's a lot more other factors as well. But like the overall,
the one factor that I would say, the obvious factor, is destroying whole planets. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, that was on Tarkin. Honestly, that was his philosophy when it came to strategy. He thought you bring down the hammer on them and do it hard enough where you break any opposition from occurring. That had the opposite effect.
Like to me, that would be the final straw. Like, this can't be, this system does not work.
Yeah, but Palpatine kind of likes that idea because it brings out suffering.
Of course he does.
So it empowers him if they do that.
Someone that values human life, values life, creativity, dynamism, sort of creation. You don't want, you want things to be preserved. Like, you don't want to destroy an entire. It's like destroying. That's like when they destroyed Thebes. Like, it was a great, powerful center of civilization, and they completely wiped it off of the map. And so it's this. We lose this part of what it means to be a human. Like, this whole human experience that we had, because they completely wiped it. It's like someone coming to America and completely wiping America off the face of the map. There's no more America. Like, all the things that we've created, all the achievements that we have sort of lost to history.
Well, however, you have to understand it from the side of the invader, because in the case of the destruction of Thebes and the destruction of Alderaan, what makes those two similar was that on Alderaan, they found out that not only Princess Leia, but her adopted father was supporting the rebellion. He was one of the few members of the Senate that not only still had political power, but it was just enough to be a threat to Palpatine. But he had to lay on the down low, and that he was one of the main supporters of the rebellion. So according to Grand Moff Tarkin and Palpatine, they needed to get rid of any form of opposition. And Alderaan was one of those planets that had the ability to be an actual match with an alliance with Mon Calamari, obviously.
If you're in power, this obviously is going to be something that you love, because it's going to help you consolidate that power, at a level that's just
you don't want opposition to come after you.
But we're talking about from the other perspective. Like, if you're a civilization, you could be like, that could be my world. I don't even have any disagreements with the Empire, but because there's a faction over there on the other side of the planet that is working against the Empire, now my whole planet's going to be destroyed. I just feel like that's such an archaic and arbitrary system. But is there any other things that the Empire was doing that might have been unpopular?
Cooperation with the Hutts.
So what was the main impetus behind the rebellion? Behind, like, the Luke sort of working with all the people to destroy the Death Star. The main rebellion, the Rebel Alliance. What was their main goal? Why did they see the empires needed to be destroyed?
So very core thing about Palpatine's empire was that it was an empire that ruled through fear. So all of his and that philosophy trickled into the military of the empire as well. They were looking for numbers. It was a huge galaxy that he had to police all the time, create that image of the empire and the fear factor among the local population. Like, hey, look at this huge, massive fleet, and hey, look, we can destroy your planet if you don't comply with our regulations. All of these things are going to affect the people's psyche as like, oh no, we are need. And when you're ruling over people through fear, that's not a concrete power, right? That's unstable power.
Appearance, yeah.
As long as you have that appearance of power, people are going to comply with whatever you tell them to, right? But as soon as you lose that power, like as soon as you lose the Death Star, that's a huge blow to your image, right? As being, that's what gave the rebels the fire that they needed and the support they needed to defeat the Empire. So that's one of the things. So, and there was like a huge a stormtrooper present on all of these planets that they ruled over to some capacity. So the Empire of Palpatine basically was trying to create this state that nobody was happy under, right? It was a state of fear, always. So
I would say the reason why, because earlier I said that a lot of the population, not a lot of them joined the rebellion. Those that did, they were on the outer rims and in and around the Hutt space. They were all in the areas that were always exploited. And the reason why the Federation separated from the Republic was because they felt disenfranchised by the core. This was the same problem that was existing.
Interesting.
It's the same situation. And the only reason why the Empire lasted that it did under decent leadership, according to the majority of the population, it was as long as the money was coming in, as long as people were getting jobs, with the exception of the outer rim, then what's the point of rebelling? There's no need to rebel. But those that did, you notice that if you look at the composition of the rebellion, most of them were of the other species of aliens.
So
there were humans too, but those aren't in the outer.
The final point that I want to make, because we're about 2 hours.
Can I make one more point before we end?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Are you okay? You're
Well,
going.
I had one more talking point, but I mean, go ahead.
So it's about the instance when you brought up when Han in the ship, when he says, "What is this witchcraft?" or something like that. When and Yoda, or I think Obi-Wan Kenobi, they lift the whole ship, right? So the thing about the Jedi at this part of the Empire, I wanted to do it for the fans as well. The Jedi are very rarely seen. They're like just stories and myth. No one's ever seen a Jedi, right? They just know that these guys existed. So
It's like finding a unicorn.
yeah. So that's what the same situation that Palpatine is having. He's this huge army, right? But people are still like, what's the Empire? We don't really know. And every now and then he has to send like his army here. He has to send his army there.
It's too vast.
Yeah, it's too vast, right? And so for everyone, the Jedi are just like this myth or like this story. They've never seen one. They don't know about them. Much and it's similar situation with the Empire, so that's why Palpatine is like constantly trying to make more and more like a military to keep creating.
There was even a propaganda campaign to smear the Jedi for that.
Right.
Call them enemies.
So the reason why I think this is an important discussion, this political component, is because in Western tradition, you see this a lot. You see a republic turn into an empire. A decentralized system or a federalized system turn into an empire. And usually it always happens with the support of a lot of people. It's not really just one person seizing power. It's, it's like in Caesar's case, the people wanted him to be a dictator. Obviously, he had a lot to do with that, but, in Napoleon's case, the people wanted Napoleon to be an empire. A lot of times, in America's case, you do see more power being centralized, and there's a lot of talk about, whether we, does a republic seem to always turn into an empire. So what would you guys prefer and why? If you could have the republic or if you could have the empire, which would you prefer to live under? Because it seems to me that none are perfect, because in the republic you have a bunch of interests dominating. So you have a group of interests dominating the resources, the power. They get to write the rules of the land, and these rules are benefiting them at the expense of all the other powers. But at least you do have some sense of autonomy, some broad autonomy for these people. Whereas in the empire system, it's more of one person has all the say. But I mean, it's still it's their interest. So I mean, to me, I would obviously prefer the Republic, despite its faults, because there's always, it's just a matter of increasing your representation and getting rid of the Palpatine. If you have the Republic and you get rid of Palpatine, I think they might be able to solve some things. If they didn't elect Palpatine, or if they figured out that he was behind this, and if they solved some of those corruption problems, then I think that it would have been a lot better. Whereas in the Empire, it's kind of like you have to destroy the whole system. So I would prefer the Republic, but I get why people would prefer the Empire, because it could lead to okay, now you don't have pirates, and now you have taxes, which could theoretically be put towards better things. You have a more stable system. You might have a system where people could rise up if they do what the Emperor wants them to do. So what are you guys' thoughts on that? Nick, I'll start with you. Republic versus Empire. The age-old question.
Neither. I'm a monarch. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not in favor of monarchies. I would say very much the Republic, and if not, I might actually consider the Trade Federation, maybe. But I would definitely stay with the Republic, partially because of representation. Even though I know that it's probably not going to be as stable, but at least I have a choice of what to do. But if you're in something like the Empire, yeah, you're going to have greater security, but the question of getting that greater security is at what cost?
Yeah.
What's the cost of that greater security? Because I'd rather secure my own means to defend myself and help myself rather than rely on someone that lives miles or thousands of miles or trillions of miles away and think that person's going to serve my interests.
Yeah.
I don't like that idea, because they don't know who I am. They don't know what I do.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm. I think that's very similar to the American independence, right? The whole idea of no taxation without representation philosophy.
Exactly.
I would probably say that a republic as well. That's probably the best system you can think of, at least in terms of representation, where everyone gets some amount of voice within the governing or in the democratic process, right?
Yeah.
That's probably the more reasonable system. But often at times we find situations where with the Empire, you might have on occasion charismatic leaders who shape the Empire into like this golden age, right?
Yep.
But as soon as they die or they're removed from power, it could easily destabilize that system. The system could easily collapse when it's all relying on one system.
Yeah.
But the advantages of like the Empire is that it's minus the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
The whole bureaucracy goes away. Like people are not fighting for conflict of interest. People are not fighting for greed or corruption. There are less chances for it. It does happen even in the Empire, but the idea is that it's more unified under one.
You can
ruler.
get jobs done better.
You can get
or quicker,
more
rather.
effectively. And so there's this whole idea, even in Rome, in the ancient Rome, they had this whole idea that during times of war, they would elect a consul who would fight for Rome as a general, because it was a time not to debate. It was
war.
Yeah, if the enemy is at your gates, you're not going to debate about how to fight him, right? There's no time to do that. So you have to elect one person with one mind to see the whole government through, the whole nation through this moment of crisis. So during certain situations, leaders do come out during moments of chaos, right?
That is true.
And I think Empire Mall is good when you're facing chaos or disaster.
Or you are under the perfect leadership.
That's what happens in the U.S. politics. When we are at war, there's a good chance that the president will get reelected again.
Yeah, so unless the wars are short, or we all know that unless we have a pure reason as to why you're at war, then if there's no reason to be in the war, naturally there's going to be gridlock. But if there's a pure reason to go to war, then they'll do it. Like example would be when the U.S. fought against the British, or when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. That gave us a clear reason and a clear enemy. But if you have something like Vietnam or wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, there's clearly going to be gridlock, and that's why the U.S. has been there for over a decade, almost 2 decades.
All right.
Yeah, so I mean, thank you guys for all of these talking points. I think, we wanted to do an hour, but we were all so passionate and interested in this topic that we went 2 hours and I think maybe 20 minutes, like nothing. And I really think we did a good job of analyzing Star Wars at a level that, it is rarely analyzed outside of, super, fandom circles. And I hope that, we touched on, like, we didn't just, because the goal for today was not just to talk about Star Wars and explain it to people, but we wanted to explain it so that we can set up a platform to where we can actually discern the central lessons that you can get out of Star Wars. Because, like with all literature, it's a reflection of human nature. And so because it's a reflection of human nature, there's these stories are in tune with our reality. Like what the reality of Star Wars has very many parallels, which I think we've pointed out, to the reality in our own lives, in our own system of government. I mean, everything that we've talked about today has a parallel in real life, whether it's at the individual level, whether it's at the collective level, or whether it's at the governmental level, or whether it's at the whole structure, fabric of the universe, like the Force. So, I think we really did a good job, and I appreciate, Nick and Sean, you guys being here. This was presented by the Wisdom Factory, and we do, we try to unite knowledge and action for the benefit of mankind. So it's important to learn about Star Wars. It's important to try to discern the wisdom from it, and it's important to understand the virtue. What led to progress. What leads to progress. What behaviors should you follow? And that's why I think Star Wars is a perfect illustration of destructive behaviors and productive behaviors. So thank you for joining us, and that's it.
Don't forget to
subscribe. So smash that subscribe button, hit that like button.
And if you want to hit the notification ones, by all means.
Tell your friends about it. Tell us what videos you want us to do next. We talk about anything.
Oh, yeah.
Our last topic was India. This one was Star Wars. We're thinking about doing a Dragon Ball Z video. You guys wanted to do some other anime sci-fi videos?
Oh, and the president of this organization right now is working on one on the history of Prussia.
History of Prussia. So we do history, we do art, we do science, math, you name it, we'll do it. Support us, guys, because we don't have money interest. We're just doing what we feel is right, and we're just doing what we like to do.
Yep. We do what we love so we can improve.
All right.
All right.